Thanks, Caroline. Thank you very much. Linda, I think will join us now and we'll start the question and answer.
Hi, thanks, Tracy, and thank you to our speakers. That was really fascinating, and I certainly learned a lot. And I think from the reactions we've seen from our audience members have also learned a lot. Now, we have quite a few questions in the Q&A box, so we will get to those. I think we will make a start with the Q&A. The first one that I'm seeing there is in relation to fermented meats, and can frozen meat be used as an ingredient? So I don't know, Mary, if you want to
take that. Yeah. So frozen meat can be used. It's important that the meat is frozen as soon after slaughtering and butchering as possible. Try to use frozen meat that's not been held at a frozen temperature for too long. And it's really for quality reasons. So if that meat is oxidized, it's going to impact the quality of the product or safety.
Okay, great, thanks. Thank you, Mary. And the second question here is around what evidence is there for generic E. coli being a reliable indicator for STEC? So I don't know who wants to take that.
Yeah, I think it's related to my presentation. I suppose there's actually very poor evidence to show a correlation between STEC specifically and E. coli. E. coli are sort of STEC are a sort of a subset of E. coli. So you have sort of generic E. coli, and then of that subset, Shiga toxin producing E. coli are E. coli that have the Shiga toxin producing genes. The principles of the two different tests are slightly different, so you really have to be specifically looking for Shiga toxin producing E. coli. I suppose when I was recommending to look for E. coli as a hygiene indicator, it's in a more broader sense to look for them as fecal indicators. Pathogens such as STEC, Salmonella are usually present in the feces of the animal. And if there's poor slaughtering, you can get fecal contamination on the carcass, and then that can cause contaminate to the meat. So you're really looking for E. coli as a hygiene indicator. And if E. coli is there, it's likely that potentially there was some kind of fecal contamination, and then it's likely there may have been pathogens as part of that contamination.
Perfect, thanks, Mary. So another question on some micro or artisan producers of kefir and kombucha have been complaining to me they have to get their small batches tested for alcohol content. Is there any derogation for small batches, please?
I take that one, Linda.
Yes, thanks.
There's no derogation as such. I suppose the relevant piece here isn't the size of the batch. The relevant piece is whether it contains alcohol above 1.2% alcohol by volume. And you can see from that validation template at the back, there are ways to do internal alcohol tests, but this must be validated using an accredited test. And you can see from the survey and from the potential food safety implications, it's a serious enough food safety concern. So there are ways and means to control the level of alcohol in some of these ferments, because if we think about it, give the SCOBY, for example, and you've got yeast and bacteria in there, and then we're adding in sugar. We're essentially feeding that, and that's the production then of carbon dioxide. It gives you a nice effervescence, and then a byproduct as well is also the alcohol production. So it's up to food business operators to understand that process, and if they want to limit the amount of alcohol, that they may need to tweak what they're doing, and they may have to stop the fermentation process by pasteurization, for example. But again, this may not fit their marketing in terms of the product they're trying to market, but there are ways and means in order to control it. And it is a concern that EHOs are also keeping a close eye on for the right reasons as well, because it's a serious enough one. So thanks.
Okay, thanks, Cormac. Thank you for that. The next question may be for you as well. It's looking at the case study on allergens. Does sulfur dioxide appear as a result of the fermentation, or was it part of the ingredients? Or
yeah, I don't have the limits exactly from that RASIP report, but just to say, in terms of if it's naturally produced, it can be naturally produced. Some sulfur compounds can be naturally produced in a number of ferments, but they're quite low levels. But as we know, it's also a food additive. and it's there as a food additive. It's there at a much higher. It's there at a much higher level. So I presume at this occasion it was added as a food additive and wasn't declared on the label itself.
Okay, thank you. Now this next question is again about the alcohol content in kombucha, but I think we can, that has been answered already by Cormac. Next question: are there any private labs that testing for fermented foods in Ireland? Haven't specified exactly what they're testing. They're looking to be tested for, but I don't know if anybody in the FSAI has any information on service provided for fermented food producers.
Well, Linda, I don't know of any particular private labs in Ireland that specialise in fermented foods, but private labs generally will test for a range of products. So I think it's probably better for the customer to directly contact that lab and establish what they can test for. I don't know if Robin has something to add around sourcing a lab.
Yeah, so excuse me, cold. I sound awful. Yes, I know Eurofins operate in Ireland, and they're very familiar with this kind of product. But it always depends which sales representative you get, for how much guidance you'll get through them. Now, what we have with the lab we're working with in the UK is we just set template testing schedules together. So a producer can approach the lab and basically say, "Can I get one kombucha test, please?" And they know what to look for. So it's a very quick way for the producer to communicate with the lab. Now, as I say, whilst there isn't one specialising in Ireland that I know of yet, I'm more than happy to share the draft testing schedules that we put together with ours, that you can share with producers or members, anyone that's interested. And if you approach somewhere like Eurofins and say, "Here's the testing schedule I'm after," they'll be able to carry that out for you. It's just, it basically translates what the producer needs to what the lab needs to hear. So, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. There's another question here for Cormac. Are there any plans to add mold-based ferments to Guidance Note 37?
Not at present, but we will take it on board. In terms of when we were drafting this guidance, there was extensive consultation with, I suppose, the artisan producers in Ireland and with the Environmental Health Service in drafting it. So that's why those products, I suppose, they're probably somewhat limited. You could see from Caroline's presentation, there's a huge range of products that are available on the market, and the ones in Guidance Note 37, I suppose, were selected because they were on the Irish market and probably more common. But we will take it on board to look at maybe reviewing it and understanding the value as well in the guidance note, that there would be value in probably expanding it out as those products expand as well. So thanks for the question.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Cormac. There are a couple of questions here on what is the safety consideration in making miso. Does anybody want to answer that first before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I can take that because I specialize in making miso. So yeah, so the process of miso is actually sort of a 3-step fermentation. So initially you have your mold-based fermentation, where you have rice or barley or some other type of grain or legume that's inoculated with a culture, a specific culture. Generally, it would be Aspergillus oryzae, but there's a number of different types of Aspergillus specific strains. And the main safety parameter for this, because there's no acidification here, the rice is soaked, drained, then steamed, cooled, and inoculated with the specific culture. And the main control here is that you're using the correct amount of starter culture for the mass of grains or legumes that you're growing, and that allows competitive exclusion, so that the Aspergillus can just outcompete absolutely everything. It produces antibiotics. It produces chemicals that allow it to compete better with other microbes. Beyond that, the main controls are you have to you have to, it's a 48-hour growth period, so you have to take very tight control over your humidity, your temperature, and airflow in your fermentation chamber. And once you've had very tight controls and you've validated that, so you say, my specific process has been lab tested and there's no pathogens there. Your main pathogen that you're looking to combat is Bacillus cereus, or the fried rice bacteria, if you're unaware. And the main control point for that is when you're soaking your rice, you're actually causing the Bacillus cereus to germinate and come out of its dormant phase. Again, if you're unaware of Bacillus cereus, it's a spore-forming bacteria, and it forms these sheaths on the outside, which are very, very heat resistant. So it's very hard to kill when it's in its dormant phase. So during the soaking periods, it comes out of its dormant phase, then it's drained and steamed, which kills off the vast majority of the Bacillus cereus population. And then once it's inoculated, that competitively excludes anything else. So that's the main risk factor. And you have to, once at the end of your fermentation period, you make sure that all of the steps you've carried out in your HACCP are validated by lab testing. That's certainly the way I've done it. Now, that's the first aspect of fermentation. Now, that's to produce enzymes. So you have protease and amylase, and these break down starches into sugars and proteins into amino acids and glutamates. And that's how you get soybeans that turn into this umami miso. So once you've got your mold ferment, that's then mixed with salt and some other form of legume, and that's left to ferment. Now, at this point, it kind of becomes more like another vegetable ferment. So your control points are salt. You will see a drop in acidity, nothing as dramatic as a kimchi or a sauerkraut. So your main controls here are you're adding enough salt to drop the water activity. So drop the water activity and only select for halophilic bacteria, to exclude things like Clostridium botulinum and other pathogens. But again, this is one of these things that you send it for lab testing to confirm that the amount of salt you put in is hitting your correct salinity, and then sending for lab testing to show your shelf lives are valid and you aren't harboring any pathogens. Once you've confirmed that, and then you have a safe product. But yes, main controls: correct inoculation rates, monitoring of humidity and temperature, confirming those steps. And then in your secondary miso fermentation, it's about salt content and monitoring of pH to a lesser extent. I hope that answers.
Great, thanks. Thank you for that, Robin. And the second question there is about, well, it's directed to EHOs. We don't have any on the panel, although if any are in our audience and wish to put in an answer, they're welcome to. Is anyone familiar with the Korean term sonmat, which means hand taste, and what are your views? So is that something that's familiar to any of our panelists?
Yes, definitely. It's the concept that means hand taste. So basic, oh, it already says that in there. So it's a belief in Korean culture that if you cook with your hands, the amount of effort that you've put into cooking your food can be tasted in the final product. And certainly when people get together in Korea and make their fermented foods, everybody will get together around a long table, all together with all of the microbes on all of their hands, and they will all be preparing all of the vegetables and putting it in collaboratively. So it's something that's very much a part of fermentation culture in the Far East.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you, Caroline. I'm just going to go because I think I skipped another question that we didn't answer about food contact materials. Are steel and glass the best materials for fermentation vessels, or should food grade plastic vessels be sufficient? Anyone want to answer that one?
I can take that. In terms of, I suppose, from our point of view, as long as it adheres to food contact material legislation, it ticks that box. But I suppose some of the producers might have a further thought on terms of the quality or the impact of steel and glass or plastic in terms of the fermentation. Because I know in some literature it reports that it does have an impact on the fermentation. Thanks.
Okay, James, Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'd just say for that from Cormac, one thing to look at when you're looking at any particular plastics for storage, they can absolutely be suitable for fermentation, but the particular consideration with fermented food, of course, or lacto-fermented food is their resistance to acid. So you just want to check that the safe pH values that particular plastic can tolerate, and that is not the same for all plastics. So yeah, just that's the main consideration really, is pertains specifically to fermented food and storage or fermentation in plastic containers.
Perfect, thank you. The next question is to Cormac. Can I check, you said to calibrate your pH probe daily, just checking that they heard this correctly.
Yeah, daily. And I suppose, as I said, this is the one quantitative measurement that can be used for, I suppose, understanding the fermentation. And even to go one step further, when you're doing that calibration, be conscious of the impact of temperature. Some pH probes automatically adjust for the temperature, because in the NERST equation that's used for calculating pH, there's a temperature variable in there. And also to say, when you're calibrating or using your calibrants, use fresh calibrants. Some might just keep dipping into the same calibrant, but it gets contaminated over time. And also use 3 calibration points, because if you've only got 2, the line can shift. It'll still be straight, but you don't know is it actually the correct calibration line. So, as I said, it's the one quantitative measurement, so get that right and use high quality calibrants and high quality equipment to do it. Thanks.
Thanks, Cormac. Okay, there's another question here around the knowledge of EHOs around fermented foods, and pointing out that alcohol production seems to be the main thing that they're looking at when inspections take place, and asking if do EHOs have specific training in fermentation processes? I mean, and is there consistency among them? We don't have any EHOs on our panel, but if anyone would like to contribute to the discussion, they can do so. Or maybe Mary, you might have some.
We don't. Yeah, so we don't have any EHO representatives today, but I know there's definitely a lot of EHOs who are watching the webinar today. I suppose we have to bear in mind EHOs inspect a number of different premises that produce a huge wide range of food. So, you know, while they do a lot of training, it's a collaborative process in terms of working with businesses. And if you have particular issues around what you view as an unfair point around how you're being inspected, raise that in the first instance with their EHO. And then the Environmental Health Service does have an enforcement consistency group. So if a query is raised, it'll be discussed if necessary at national level. In terms of training, the EHOs would do a lot of comprehensive training, and they also have the reason that we've written Guidance Note 33 and Guidance Note 37 is targeted to food businesses, but also to official agencies in terms of their training and understanding the different critical points that need to be monitored in these products. And lastly, I'd say if there is any particular issue, you can contact the advice line in the Food Safety Authority of Ireland, which is info@fsci.ie. If there is a specific query you want to raise, then we can direct that to the correct person.
Perfect, thanks, Mary. And I think, as Mary said, we have a huge number of EHOs signed up for this webinar, and a huge number of EHOs that attend all our webinars. So I think their appetite there for ongoing training and development of their expertise is very clear.
Maria, if I could just contribute to the point as well, more so from the producer point of view, but I think it's for the amount of producers we have here, but it's something I always try to hammer home, is that it's very much a two-way street. EHOs have a really hard gig. It's a really tough job, and they're expected to know so much. So it's important that as a producer, you're helping that learning about your specific product, because these are, as we've discussed many a time, there's been an exponential growth in this product sector. So it's a bunch of new businesses that potentially a councillor or an environmental health officer hasn't seen before. So it is very much part of the producer's responsibility as well to help and engage with that. Yeah, that's something we work on with the Guild, but yeah, I thought I'd raise that.
Perfect. Thanks. Thanks for that contribution, Robin. This is another question for you, actually. Can you expand on the Primary Authority Agreement project? I think people are probably interested to hear about that, and how might it work in Ireland? Have you given consideration to that?
Yeah, okay. So it was mentioned in the chat that there is an Irish version of this. Let me just scroll up and try to find it. Yes, from Denise, just to clarify, there is a lead authority system in Ireland between National Environmental Health Service and multinational premises, limited number, mainly national. This does exist. Okay, so from that, it seems that there is a similar thing, but I do need to learn more about this in the Irish context. But I can explain how it works in the UK context, if that would be helpful. So a primary authority is essentially a collaboration between one specific council's environmental health and a specific producer. So let's say it's the Environmental Health Service in Bristol, and then they work with a specific kimchi maker, and they collaborate, they find out real strong templates, what's expected to be seen within the production of this specific product and the processes that are expected. Then that council body becomes the primary authority. So it becomes basically the national expert on this topic. And then all other council bodies throughout the country will defer to that primary authority if a similar product is being made in their authority. So the project that the Guild's looking to do is have a primary authority for every single product category represented by the Guild. And then if there is a member of the Guild, they can defer to that primary authority, or they can point towards that primary authority when they're speaking with their council. So it essentially gives more or less guidelines that everyone across the country can follow, and then a body of expertise or an expert council they can go to if they have queries. It's I would say it's similar to the guidance notes to some extent, but it is I think there is some translation there, but yes, it's something I need to learn more about in the Irish context, but that's vaguely how it works in the UK without getting too bogged down into the specifics.
Brilliant. Thank you, Robin. There's another question here about the HACCP template, around the cost of it, and then do they change it? Now, I don't know, you may not want to give the details of the cost on the webinar, but maybe you could just talk through how that template works and what the process is. And I suppose also just for a lot of the panelists have put in a lot of really useful information in the chat as well. So if there's anything else that you want to put in there or any links, please do. And I'd recommend that our audience have a good look at the chat and some of the information that's there.
Okay, so the template project is again to have a template HACCP for every product that is represented by the Guild. So if there is a new business that's setting up and it hasn't developed its own HACCP yet, it can take one of these templates and build upon it and put their own process in. And because it's one that's sort of centralized from the Fermenters Guild, it's been worked on by expert producers within the Guild, then it's kind of accepted and known that this is a good template to work from. Cost-wise, the project hasn't been finished off yet, but it will be free to members. And anyone with Fermenters Guild membership will have access to this resource. As it's still in the process of being built, if there is any specific queries or if anyone is looking for templates, if you just fire us an email and we'll be able to work something out. But yeah, that's where we're at. But the goal for the end of 2020 is to have essentially a codex of template HACCPs for anyone to use who's a Guild member.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Robin. And then asking for recommendations of books for those starting a fermentation business or starting fermentation at home. Now, I know some of our panelists have written books themselves, but if there are any other books or indeed your own books that you want to recommend, please do so, or you can put them in the chat also. James, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so just looking through the reading list that I put at the back of my book, obviously recommend my book of Cabbage and Kimchi. It's great. Also recommend Dr. Caroline Gilmartin's excellent book. But one that's really brilliant, particularly I'd say for like food business operators working on food. There's a book called The Handbook of Food and Beverage Fermentation Technology, which was edited by Y.H. Hui from 2004. This is a very well referenced and technical 900 pages covering everything to cheese, salami, tempeh, megen kai. It's a bit elusive. Try a university library if you can't find that. Also, the humanistic understanding of kimchi and Kimjang culture, compiled by the World Institute of Kimchi, specifically on kimchi, of course. Then, yeah, there's a plethora of kind of more certain specific resources. I know that Robin could certainly speak to koji and miso books and resources. And then obviously there's the broad guides such as the Noma Guides Fermentation, the Art of Fermentation, and also Wild Fermentation. But yeah, if Caroline or Robin want to add to that.
Yeah, again, I will just hark on about the British Columbia Centre for Disease Control page. It's not a book, but that resource is incredible if you're just starting out or you're just getting into it. It's just a great way to get a very quick overview, and it's actually a resource that's built for the equivalent of environmental health over there. But then if you're looking for specific miso and koji information, the Japanese Institute of Brewing has comprehensive texts on the topic. Bit expensive to get them imported, but more than like I would say essential reading if you're going into koji fermentation. And then beyond that, David Shirtliff and Aogi's The Book of Miso is very comprehensive when it comes to traditional miso making. So I would say the Institute of Brewing, Japanese Institute of Brewing, for technical knowledge on things like koji, and the Book of Miso is a great place to start for your sort of functional and practical knowledge of how it's carried out. But yeah, that would be my specialism. And yeah, British Columbia Centre for Disease Control is brilliant.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Caroline, do you want to add something?
I would just like to add that there is if you obviously just written a book about vinegar, there was one book that was just so informative and useful, all about the history, all about all of the other techniques that are used. Because I'm a woman of a certain age, I have gone completely blank about it. So in a second, I shall just go and find it and I shall type the reference in the comments. It's definitely worth following up. It's not very easy to find, but I can't remember.
Perfect. Thanks, Caroline.
Just sorry, just to further to that, I wondered if that book was Vinegar, the Eternal Condiment by Reginald Smith.
That's it.
Yes,
that is
I thought it might be. It's a really brilliant book. It's great, and it doesn't really get enough coverage. I don't think his publisher pushed it very hard.
So
but that's a great one. And just further to what Robin was saying, Shirtlift's material is very, very largely available online. His own website, Soy Info Center. So that's definitely worth checking out. And then also I've remembered I've got a list of some of the books that I've mentioned tidily online. So I'm just going to paste that in the chat for people.
That would be great. Thank you. That's great. Thanks, James. Okay, so moving on then to look at there's a question for you, Mary, about the terms like live, raw, probiotics and what those actually mean.
So I suppose labeling isn't my particular subject area that I'm an expert in, but broadly speaking, anything that would be considered a health claim, in particular anything around the terms like probiotic or active or live, implies there's a health claim. They're not allowed on the label. So I've put in the chat there the link to FCI's guidance on labeling for probiotic terms. The term raw, I'm not sure. I think if it was for certain things, you'd have to label like raw milk. You'd have to let people know that that's raw milk because it's unpasteurized milk, to be aware of the risk potentially. But if it was in relation to probiotic foods, it's probably considered a health claim. Again, if you have specific queries around labeling, I'd encourage you to send them to the advice line in FCI at info@fci.ie, and they will send the query to the specific person that can answer it for you.
Perfect. Thanks, Mary. And a question here for Caroline. Can I ask about specific legislation around producing vinegars and the risks, etc., and making vinegar from kombucha?
Yeah, that's a very interesting one, because if you want to sell vinegar, you have to meet a whole different level of acidity than if you're making vinegar at home. I'm not sure that the levels are exactly the same in Ireland as they are in the UK, but I do know that in the UK, if you're making apple cider vinegar, for example, it must contain a minimum of 5% acetic acid. If you're making wine vinegar, it must contain 6% acetic acid. Making sherry vinegar, it should contain 7% acetic acid to be able to be called vinegar and to be safe for all of the purposes that one might want to use it for. If you're making kombucha vinegar, it's very, very difficult to reach that 5% level of acidity. So you would need to check and see what level of acidity you would have in your kombucha. I would expect it to be around 3.3, 3.5%. And because of the particular makeup of microbes in there, you would find it hard to get any higher than that. You'd have to, it's the presence of yeast that kind of upsets the situation a little bit, which you don't have when you're just making vinegar. So if you wanted to sell your kombucha vinegar, you probably would have to put in, I don't know, vinegar in inverted commas and then say 3.3% acidity or something, so that you weren't pretending to sell actual vinegar. But it could be possible to get to 5%. I haven't seen it myself, but I haven't tried to do it in an industrial, you know, like a commercial setting.
Perfect. I am very conscious that we've gone over time, so thank you for everybody's patience, and everybody is pretty much staying with us. I see, and so I thank the panelists for giving us a lot of their time. But I'll try and get through the remaining questions as quickly as I can. Do you think somebody had asked about whether or not the presentations would be passed around? But we won't be sending around the slides, but we have recorded the webinar, and a link to the recording will be sent to everybody who has registered for it. So a question here, typically what shelf life are fermented kimchi or sauerkraut given?
I jump in and say, I don't think there is really a typical. It depends on your shelf life testing and how far out you want to test it to. When I started out producing, we did shelf life testing to 3 months, and then we extended that shelf life testing after we did more tests to 6 months. To be honest, I could probably extend it further. It's a pretty fridge stable product. I would say though that for me, after 6 months, the organoleptic attributes of the kimchi, which is to say how it tastes and the texture of it, are probably going to degrade slightly. So I probably wouldn't seek to test it any further than that, because I just don't really want customers really having my kimchi if it's being kept for that long, unless they are particularly seeking an old kimchi for using in kimchi jjigae or something like that. But yeah, it depends on how far you seek to test it to, is really the answer to that question.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, James. Question here on what suggestions would you give on fermenting rice and different types of lentil batter and how to store and increase shelf life? Anybody want to take that one? Robin?
Okay, I will need a little bit of clarification. So when it's lentil batter, are we talking about something like a dosa? And when we're talking about fermented rice, are we talking about something like a koji? What type of? Well, I'll just. I'm not sure what kind of fermentation we're talking about, and if I can get more specifics, I can give a more specific answer.
We'll see if that person comes back to us with more detail. There's a question about kombucha in a cafe scenario selling to the final consumer. If they keep the pH below 4.2 and monitor this, how long can it be kept post-fermentation? And post-fermentation shows it stays below 4.2 and the product is not bottled. What legislation would be relevant here, given that listeria is inhibited at this pH? I don't know who wants to take that one.
I can talk about kombucha. I can't necessarily talk about the legislation in Ireland around doing that. But again, it sounds to me like this kombucha is being brewed in a batch and then that batch just being left there. I'm not sure if they're continually topping up the kombucha and maintaining the pH at 4.2. Again, one of your bigger concerns is actually going to be whether this is going to become alcoholic or what your alcohol level is in that. So I would say that that would be something that you would need to think very carefully about, growing your kombucha in a cafe and not bottling it. I have always recommended, when I've spoken to people in cafes, that they start with a kombucha. Kombucha scobies can change over time, but you get a kombucha SCOBY, you buy one from an organization that sells kombucha scobies that you are very certain of the of where it's come from, so you'd be fairly confident that you didn't have any pathogens like Listeria present in your kombucha in the first place. And if you're following good hygiene practices when you are making your kombucha, introducing Listeria into a kombucha culture when you're making fresh tea and adding sugar should really not be something that would be a huge risk. But legislation wise, I'm not sure where Ireland stands on that.
Okay, we'll move on.
Sorry, just legislation-wise, as far as I understand in the UK, if you're selling something like a kombucha in a cafe, it's treated just like tea, or it's treated just like homemade lemonade. It's treated the same way, but you will need to put specific measure into your HACCP that it's not alcoholic, and obviously that your HACCP shows and validates that your product is safe, following sort of Caroline's guidance there. That's how I understand it works in the UK. Again, it might be different in Ireland, but the main issue is make sure it's not alcoholic.
Yeah, I think I agree, Robin. Listeria wouldn't really be a problem with this product because the pH is so low in it, and it's probably more around those other characteristics like the alcohol content that they need to bear in mind.
Thank you. So an EHO attendee is asking, will the Guild be doing further training in Ireland? We've come across a lot of weird and wonderful food premises after COVID, which has led to a lot of queries and problems for both the EHOs and the food producers. I think during COVID, half the population opened a food business of one kind or another. So yeah, looking for more training and more interaction with the Guild there. Don't know if there are any plans, but certainly there seems to be an appetite.
Short answer is absolutely. It's something we're really keen to do, is to, again, doing these workshops and allowing everyone to share this knowledge. It diminishes that adversarial relationship that sometimes producers can have with EHOs. So yes, we're very much looking to do more workshops, more webinars, more training events. Specifically in Ireland, as I say, we're looking to grow in Ireland over the next year. But until that point, I'm not sure how EHOs are structured, if they work under specific councils or areas in Ireland. But what we've had in the UK is, as I say, specific councils approaching us for training events. But if it's something that EHOs or groups of EHOs are interested in, please just fire us an email, because we can put something together, and we have quite a lot of resources that we can share quickly. So if it is a training event that people are interested in, we would be more than happy to put one on, organize something and get that put together for you, put together a number of speakers and build a training event that suits the needs of the environmental health officer or officers.
Thanks, Robin. Moving on, what is your opinion on the labelling of the fermented food on in-premises use for allergens only versus packaging labels where ingredients and ingredient compounds are provided? Anybody want to?
I don't really understand that question, Linda, to be honest. I suppose, unless it's the difference between labelling a loose product versus...
Yes, I think that's what I'm assuming that we're talking about.
There's various legislation that needs to be complied with, in particular the legislation around labelling of allergens is one that a lot of food businesses get caught out on, and some of you often see a lot of recalls for not labelling certain allergens, can cause a health risk for those groups who are allergic to particular products. I would say go to our website to find out all the information you need to around labelling, and any specific queries info@fci.ie.
Perfect, thanks, Mary. How does an FBO demonstrate that shelf life has been safely applied, and what parameters should they be testing for at the end of shelf life?
I'll take that one.
Okay,
Again, shelf life, it's a holistic approach. So guidance note 18 is our best practice guidance on setting shelf life. It depends on the product. For the fermented meats, you know, you're going to be worried about pathogens maybe, but for the plant-based products, you'd probably be looking at a lot of those when the food safety is really controlled by the pH and the production of acid that lowers the pH. And some of those can really sustain a very long shelf life. So then you're looking at, as James mentioned, the sensory properties of the product is really what's limiting the shelf life rather than the safety. So it's really a good understanding of your product, following the steps in guidance note 18. And again, if you go to our website, there's also a webinar that I did that's on there that'll help, and any specific queries, again, test out.
perfect. Thanks, Mary. Is there an available list of labs that can do food testing in smaller scale? Well, there is a list of labs that do food testing on the Safefood website. If people want to look at that. You would have to then contact the labs for the specific tests and for your specific product.
Yeah.
I
Maybe
think
just to mention, Linda, as well, INAB, is where you will go to find a list of labs that are accredited to test for different parameters. A lab being accredited is not legally required, but it's definitely best practice. So best practice to use a lab that's accredited.
absolutely, thanks. Is metal leaching a concern for kombucha fermentation using food grade stainless steel? Somebody that's asking.
I can do that one.
Thanks, Caroline.
Actually, food grade stainless steel 304 is resistant to attack from acetic acid and lactic acid, as far as I know. So there should be no problem with using it for fermentation of kombucha. I think if you were looking at very long-term storage of I don't know, starter culture, if you wanted to, then perhaps you might have to look at the 316. But as far as I know, 304 is sufficient.
Perfect, thank you.
Sorry, what I would add to this as well is when you're buying fermentation vessels or tanks, you have to make sure that the stainless steel is actually food grade stainless steel, because I have seen a number of times when people buy something off Alibaba, it arrives 3 weeks later and it is not food grade steel. You ferment it and it is not resistant to acetic acid. It's not resistant to lactic acid. So have a very careful look at your suppliers when you're getting hold of food grade metal, and don't pick the cheaper option.
Perfect, thanks. Good advice. Thanks, Robin. This is a question around the SCOBY used to make kombucha. Is it safer for producers to make their own, or is there a list of reputable suppliers of SCOBY or where they can source it? Any takers for that?
Yeah, I'll talk about that. I don't know whether you have a list in Ireland but there are certain producers here in the UK where I have got kombucha scobies from in the past. I mean, how reputable they are, you're only ever going on sort of what's on the website. If you know somebody who already makes kombucha, then you could ask them if they wanted to start you off. You can buy a shop kombucha, and if it is a good quality shop kombucha, you can even generate your own kombucha SCOBY from that. But the other thing that you can do is, if you have a kombucha SCOBY and you're up and running, you can just get it tested and check that it's got nothing untoward in it whatsoever. And any kombucha producer should do that regularly anyway. And then you'll have the confidence to know that what you're selling is what you want to be selling. So I would always recommend getting it tested, whether you've got it from somewhere else or not anyway.
Perfect, thank you. I think we are kind of coming to the end. There's some information posted in the Q&A around EHOs and how to contact them, and they have an annual forum organised by the EHAI. There's one question here on legalizing the word kombucha. So what do the panel think, as in a definition of kombucha and what it should be?
I can take that. Almost impossible to define what kombucha is, since it's something that is over 2,000 years old and has passed from person to person. Colleague and I are currently working on this, looking at maybe defining kombucha as something that can actually start another culture of kombucha, and a kombucha soda perhaps as something that can't, that's been pasteurized, that's still for sale. But it's a very, very difficult thing to do, and people would be very resistant to that because they don't want to be constrained. So as yet, no, I can't particularly see that happening anytime in the future. There's not the very strong cultural link. For example, Korea has a very strong cultural link with kimchi and have got special protected status for their kimchi, because, and it's a protected term. So it would be very difficult to do that because nobody really owns kombucha.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that. I think we've come to the end of our questions, so we'll close off the Q&A there, and just again thank our speakers. There's been huge interest in this. There's a lot of applause and a lot of love for guidance note 37. Seems to be the clear winner for today. So that is something that we will all take away. So thank you to everybody for sharing your expertise. And I think there's an awful lot of information within the webinar and within the links and things like that that people have provided. So I think it should keep anybody who is interested in producing fermented foods very busy for a long time. Lots of Christmas reading and books to add to the Christmas list as well. So thank you to our panelists, and also to our audience who have, stayed with us as we've gone way over time, but we thought that might be the case. And so, as Tracy, I don't know if Tracy has any more housekeeping things. I probably will
No,
recording.
yeah, just to thank everyone again for joining, echo your sentiments, Linda, and pleased to ask if you would participate in the online evaluation. Your feedback is vital to us to help us form our future webinars. So thank you again to everyone.
That's great. Thank you very much, everybody. Let's sign off.
Thanks all.